Hey everyone, it's Matthew here, Community Support Provider for Public Health and Human Services. I'm coming to you again today via video. Super grateful to see all the progress we've made as a community and all the work folks have been doing to manage all the changes and constant evolving of within our community to the different COVID-related changes. And I wanted to talk today, continue to go further on some topics that we've been covering quite a bit in these videos. And I want to talk about the connection between anger and stress. Because we're all feeling a lot right now and continue to. Talked recently in a video about humor, so I hope you're finding ways to integrate more humor into your life. But in regards to anger and stress, it feels appropriate right now to note that when we feel overly stressed, which is what I want to talk about today, we can become more prone to anger. And in this state, both anger and stress, when they're combined, can become a lot more difficult to manage. And one of the reasons that this is because we have a fight or flight response in our brain. It's a safety mechanism, it's a defense mechanism to protect us. And when that response is triggered, we are physiologically aroused, stimulated as a result for protection. And we find ourselves more easily angered because of that. And that can be a really powerful way to defend ourselves, and it can also create a lot of problems in our lives. Like poorly managed stress, anger that isn't handled in a healthy way can not only be uncomfortable for yourself and other people, but it can damage your own health, compromising your immune system. It can damage your personal life in the form of your relationships, and it can also hinder professional success by getting in the way of important things that you may want. This also can, of course, lead to greater levels of stress and anger. So it can kind of spiral on itself, especially when it starts to really feel like it's going in its own path. You know, I've experienced this morning already, just in saying some things in the workplace that were venting some of my frustration, but I could tell that it made people a little uncomfortable because they didn't know how to respond to it. And I had to go back and do some amends with those situations. So I think there's examples of this all over if we take the time to look for them. I think a good analogy is when our cup is full, our metaphorical cup of emotion, it automatically will just spill over, and it can either spill over in ways that we have no control over, or we can intentionally pour some of that out in ways that can be helpful. And I want to talk about this because if it's one thing that residents of our community know how to do, it is endure. Folks here are hardy and know that hard, painful, terrible things happen, that they're a part of life. That's the nature of being alive. Every entrepreneur, every service industry worker, city and county employee, every resident knows that that things just don't always work out. So because of that, the real path for us in this time to move forward is not in denying that pain exists, because we know it does. But since we know it does, we should just acknowledge that it does. By becoming a community strong enough to bear witness to the pain we're in, by sticking together inside of what's hurting and frustrating, by opening ourselves up to that experience for ourselves and each other, it allows us to stay connected and to remember that maybe I'm not experiencing this, but you are, and the next time around that could be me, and I'm going to treat you in a way that acknowledges that. Because the reality is, when we're afraid of loss, and there's a lot of losses happening right now, we can tend as humans to cling to a belief that my fear is more valid than yours, and that I'm right, and that the other people are wrong in how they're handling things or what they're feeling. And I can think that way in order to safeguard myself and the things that I am afraid to lose, the things I love. And that impulse to sort of barricade myself or ourselves against loss and pain and suffering, um, we somehow believe that that's going to help us survive. Um, and this can take the form of this can be in the form of taking sides in controversial issues or demonizing those that we perceive as threatening. There are a lot of examples of this in the world right now. It's a really simple one that I witnessed just the other day was at one of our local services that there outside there was a person who was working, and it was a really hot day, and this person had a mask on very similar to mine, and they kind of pulled it down and were obviously getting some air, and somebody came along and just started yelling at them, yelling at this person because their mask was lowered, shaming them, criticizing them for this situation that they were in. And I stepped in um, and asked what was going on. And so the person who lowered their mask was really upset then as well. So what we had happen here is one person saw somebody not wearing their mask properly and got angry, and that cup overflowing and spilling out onto that person, and that criticism, and that I'm right, you're wrong attitude. And then that person who received that, who was being dumped on, then they got angry and got defensive. And so we have two people whose fight or flight responses are triggered, and one person's stress triggered another person's stress, and it's really easy for that person to turn around and dump that onto somebody else. And you can see how we end up getting caught in a chain reaction where our stress and our anger start to dismantle our cohesion as a community. Um, and that's a problem, because the reality is we're all on the same team. And when we start to attack each other, we break down that team. We break down that team that is our community. And we weaken our ability to stand up to the real threats that exist. The real threats like a pandemic, the real threats like our economic well-being, like our mental, emotional well-being. And when we do that, we weaken our collective strength. The tricky thing here is that our true survival never exists in a world where we have to lie about our own feelings. So it's not about, shutting it down or turning it off, or pretending we're in more control than we are, because that just makes us desperately more anxious and more rabid in our attempts to make everything work out. The most efficient and effective way to keep that cohesion and stay safe is acknowledging that this is hard and that these impossible things are happening, and telling the truth to each other in a way that allows us to connect and to enter that experience together. So when those emotions come up, that stress, we can just let that run through us. When I'm working with folks, I talk about emotions as a wave, and that wave usually comes and it crests and it passes. And if we just witness that wave as it passes without reacting to it or resisting it, then it will be done, and we can proceed with dealing with things in a way that keeps us cohesive and connected. And so I really want to challenge us as a community to work on those processes together, to maintain our cohesion, to maintain our resiliency together. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no weakness in that. That, in fact, is an incredible strength. So I want to encourage everybody to find safety by coming together and being willing to be curious about what others are experiencing, how they're dealing with it, and using that curiosity to bridge the gaps that can exist between us. If we can do this as a community, we have a safety for ourselves that can't be taken away by external forces in the world. It won't keep us from loss and it won't keep us from threats, but it will help let us feel more held and more supported inside what is coming and what is happening. So the real cutting edge of growth here and development is in dealing with that together and hurting together and coping together. It's in that companionship, not that angry correction or that angry attack that keeps us strong. Acknowledgement, being seen and heard and witnessed inside this truth about each of our unique lives, that's the real way to move through our grief. And I want to remind you all that our community support line is available here for anyone that needs that resource and needs some coaching in how to manage all of those feelings. Please feel free to reach out Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. at 218-877-7071, and on Saturday and Sunday from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. that same number. If you're dealing with a mental health crisis, remember that 24/7 you have 218-623-1800, and remember, we're all in this together, guys. I appreciate the way that you are working to stay strong, and we'll see you next time.